So our next speaker, I mean, one of the things we wanted to talk about was the importance of early childhood care and education for families, but also for small businesses and entrepreneurs. As anybody who's tried to work in the last couple of years know, I think we all have a deeper appreciation for not just the need for, but the lack of adequate early childhood services for most New Mexico families and parents. So our next speaker just newly assumed the helm of New Mexico Voices for Children, although she's been the backbone of the operation for a while and a great team over there. And New Mexico Voices, if you're not familiar with them, is, I think, the preeminent sort of research, policy, and advocacy group, not just for families, but for a lot of the issues we're talking about today, economic justice, and certainly sustainability in terms of how we approach our state budget and economy. So we invited Amber to talk a little bit about how early childhood fits into this whole conversation around sustainability and supporting small local businesses and the families that they employ and the families that run them. So happy to introduce Amber Wallin.
Thanks so much, Eric. I appreciate it. Let me share my screen here. Does that look good? Eric, can you confirm? Okay, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Amber Wallin. I'm the Executive Director at New Mexico Voices for Children, and really happy to be here with you all today, and happy to be with two of my predecessors. Both Eric and Ona were former Executive Directors at Voices for Children, and Henry has been a longtime supporter of ours, and so it feels great to be here with friends, and just appreciate the work that's been outlined today and the ideas and really the focus on sustainability and equity and thinking about all the different ways that we do that. Happy to talk with you all about early learning and early care programs and how those are a crucial element of everything else that's been discussed today, and maybe just a little more information on Voices real quick. But for those who aren't familiar with Voices, we're a nonpartisan nonprofit that was founded over 30 years ago by a group of pediatricians who were treating children for health conditions in their clinics, but who realized that in order to really address the issues that families were facing, they needed to go upstream and look at policy, as David said earlier, really focusing on what are the policies that are impacting our children and our families and our workforce and our communities, and how can we improve those to create a better state. And so New Mexico Voices for Children does research and policy and advocacy work on a lot of different issues that impact kids and families. And we focus on health and education, but maybe our biggest area of focus is on economics, family economics, fiscal policy at the state level. And all of that work is really focused around improving conditions for kids and for families. And as Ona has said, improving opportunities for our kids and our families. And so, of course, it might give it away in our name and in our mission that early childhood education and care programs, which you'll see me abbreviated on slides as ECEC programs, have always been a high priority of ours because of the immense potential that they have for improving outcomes for kids. And so what we know is that 90% of brain growth occurs in those first 5 years. And the importance of the earliest years to really the lifelong health and well-being of children cannot be overstated. And we know that that healthy development is dependent on positive, rich, and nurturing environments, and that those programs that touch children's lives during that time period, that provide that safe, supportive environment, really have an outsized role in setting kids up to reach their full potential and benefiting the whole state. And so the benefits of those early childhood programs that have those qualities are really well researched and well documented. And so you can see there that high quality early learning and care programs are linked to a number of different improvements in childhood health and well-being and education indicators, graduation rates, many different health outcomes, child welfare, graduation rates, years of higher ed pursued, adult employment and income. So we know that there are a lot of benefits, obviously, for kids and families. But we also know that not only are those early care programs important to kids and families because of the benefits that they provide directly to children, but also, of course, because they allow parents to work, and because they allow many parents even to work within that same industry. And so we know that the childcare industry is a very important one in our state. We know it employs thousands of workers, primarily in small, local, and home-based childcare provider settings. And these businesses and the supports that they provide to our communities are really largely driven and staffed by women, especially women of color, who are providing really important economic contributions. And you can see there's a recent study, it was done by UC Berkeley, and it showed that every public dollar invested in early childhood programs generates nearly $2 in economic outputs from those early childhood businesses and workers in those businesses as they operate their programs, as they pay their employees, as they buy goods, and then as those teachers who are paid spend their money quickly and locally. And not only are those small business childcare providers providing really crucial care for kids and employing workers and generating economic activity, but that sector is also supporting our economy in a bigger, and especially as we've seen during the pandemic, a really fundamental sense, because it provides a crucial service for families. It means that parents have safe, supportive, nurturing, accessible environments to send their kids while they work and while they go to school. And the economic impacts of that, of course, they're huge, because access to childcare is linked to increases in worker productivity. It's increased to strong increases in maternal labor force participation, in job retention, in income potential. And we know that all of those factors loom, again, especially high. This is an equity issue because they loom especially high for women, for single mothers. And we know that childcare for single mothers pursuing higher ed, that is actually linked to an increase in graduation rate of 21%. And that high quality birth to 5 education has what is estimated to be a 13% return on investment. And we know that these aren't just increases in productivity, but they're increases in that participation, increases in economic output of the childcare sector itself. And that none of this is theoretical, that none of it is a vague long-term benefit, that these are really concrete immediate returns on investments, what we get when we support a really robust and strong early childhood care and education industry. But of course, we know that issues persist that can, within childcare, that can hold our families and our businesses and our economy back. And what we know is that childcare is a real pressure point for all of those different sectors, for families, for kids, for businesses, for our economy. And that if we have issues within the childcare sector and within early learning and education and care programs, that's an issue for everybody within a state, not just parents and not just those businesses. And so some issues that I'd lift up are, we know that childcare costs are really high, and that even with high childcare costs, that workers are still underpaid. So on the family side, data shows that over 40% of single parent income goes to childcare expenses if those parents are working. We know that the average annual cost of childcare is higher than college tuition and fees at a public university. And even while parents are paying so much of our incomes, I have a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old, and I know this firsthand, even as we're paying large chunks of our incomes to find those really safe and supportive environments, we also know that workers are really undercompensated, that oftentimes they may be making a little more than minimum wage, even though they're holding such immense responsibility. And even though they're training, they're going through lots of training, many of them have associate's degrees, bachelor's degrees, they're carrying immense responsibility and have immense knowledge. But we also know that they make on average in our state less than $24,000 a year, and that their poverty rate, you can see there it's 27% poverty rate among early care workers, that's significantly higher than the rest of the workforce in the state. And then unfortunately, we know that COVID created even greater challenges for for our families and our kids and our businesses. And again, that those challenges kind of came to a head in the pressure point of childcare. You can see that first data point there, that about 40% of New Mexico parents in the state, parents in our state who are working, who have young children, have had their childcare disrupted in the past month alone because of COVID. So we know COVID's not over. We know it's still impacting our families, our workers, and our businesses. We also know that right now New Mexico has a shortfall of childcare spots. So that's an estimate from the early care department, that there's a shortage of over 20,000 licensed slots in our state, and that it's estimated that there's only enough space right now for about 50% of infants and toddlers in the state to receive childcare. So we know that those types of limits that parents are facing, that workers are facing, we know that those productivity losses really are holding our parents, our workers, our businesses, and the economy back. And so we know it's important that we look at childcare as a really crucial economic support that it is, and support it as such. And I'd also just mention briefly, especially because equity has been a theme throughout the day, but that we know that all of the impacts of COVID are not race or gender neutral, and that the negative impacts have fallen especially hard on women, particularly women of color, those women who are more likely to work in jobs that pay low wages, have fewer benefits, have less access to affordable and high quality childcare while they work. And they're also much more likely to be owning childcare businesses and to be working in the childcare industry that the entire economy depends on to thrive. So we know that as we talk about all these childcare issues, that these are equity issues as well. And even with all these challenges, what I'd also looked up is that there's good news too, and that's that we've had really important policy improvements over the past few years that better support the childcare industry and better recognize its importance for families and kids and workers and businesses and the economy. And David made the point on the previous panel that we have to show up for the policy discussions in order to create a sustainable and equitable economy. And that's so true. And it's definitely true within childcare and early childhood policy. And there's still more to do. And I'm running up on time, but I wanted to just lift up some of the things that are really looming large for the state right now when it comes to early childhood care and education. And I'll just mention that again, early childhood is one of those policy areas where right now no one is winning. I mentioned the enormous cost for parents who are struggling to find care and to afford care. And then we also know that workers are barely getting by, really high poverty rates for an immensely talented professional workforce. And then also our childcare businesses are also struggling. They operate on really narrow profit margins, and they're small businesses, they're local businesses, they're owned by women, they're owned by communities of color, and they're having a hard time keeping in business. And so this, as much as any other as an industry, is a policy area that really requires strong government intervention and solutions in order to ensure that families can afford great care, that workers can afford to work in the industry, and that businesses can thrive. And so the policies at the forefront are really about adequately compensating a professional workforce, ensuring businesses have the supports that they need to continue to survive during the pandemic and be able to thrive after. And then we expand access to families, that we're expanding slots, that we're lowering costs for families so that workers can show up in a really reliable way, can continue to show up for work, and continue to advance their careers. And all of this is dependent on robust and stable funding of our early childhood systems. Right now we're seeing big influxes and federal funding coming in, but we also know that that's temporary. Those are temporary supports that we can't necessarily count on. So we need to have really strong state general fund support to continue to come in and improve and expand access to early childhood programs. A couple of years ago, the state took a really smart step of creating a dedicated early childcare trust fund. That's important. That's a piece of it. But we also know that we're only just beginning in our state to really provide services to our families. We're only beginning to acknowledge the immense importance of those first 5 years, the benefits for families and the benefits for the economy. And so the money coming in from that trust fund is not nearly enough to provide a stable funding source. What we really need are multiple robust streams of funding, and that really includes, especially this year, funding from the Land Grant Permanent Fund. This was a proposal that Eric actually was one of the brains behind. Over a decade ago, it came out of Voices, and just recently passed the legislature. But now what that means is, now that the legislature has approved it, it goes on to voters. Voters have to approve it. And what that will do, it will not only expand funding for K-12 education programs, but it will provide a dedicated source of funding for the early care programs that we know are crucial for our kids and our economy. And we need all of those different things. You know, we would say at Voices that those first 5 years are the most important, not just for kids and for families, but for our state as a whole. And so, you know, a sustainable, equitable economy is within reach. And we say childcare is one of those key pieces to push forward that requires the support of all of those who own and who need and who benefit from a strong early childhood industry. We need everyone to get involved and to push for those policies that really support that brighter future for our state as a whole. And with that, I'll wrap up and stop sharing, and just thanks again for having Voices here, and appreciate you all.